Hello and welcome to the second episode of the B.K Jackson True Crime Suspense Horror Show. So what we're going to talk about today, well, for those of you that read my blog, had a wee look and seen on the last episode, today is going to be a Ted Bundy Sunday. So what does that mean? Basically that means, like I said in the last episode, I am going to be doing a few book reviews. So today is going to be one of those. It's going to be on a Ted Bundy book, which is now popping up on your screen, but also it is this. It is the Ted Bundy Conversations with a Killer book. So what did I find with this book? Well, interesting book, definitely. Of course, it's going to be interesting. It's all about Ted Bundy, a subject and a serial killer and a person that, of course, many people know world over. It's vastly interesting. It's very captivating, not just for the killings that actually occurred, but obviously for the mindset of Ted Bundy himself. What did I find in this book? Of course, I was really keen to read the book. I'd seen the Netflix documentary, The Conversations with a Killer, and where it showed snippets of the conversations, not a great deal of them, as well as interviews with the authors, things like that. But it didn't give as much as I would have liked with the actual Netflix program, so I obviously went on to read the book. The book itself, I'm going to be honest, I was a bit disappointed with it. I've got massive respect for anybody that writes a book. I mean, I know it goes into actual writing of a book. Your heart and soul goes into it. But considering that this book took a year to 2 years to write, I was a little bit disappointed. The author, Stephen McCloud, I don't know how to pronounce it, and Hugh Ainsworth in this book, seem to press quite a lot for Ted Bundy to confess to the killings that he had committed. That wasn't really their job to do so. That was the job of the police office that actually apprehended Bundy. Of course, the courts, the authorities, things like that. That was their job. I mean, their job is essentially to document Ted Bundy's story and then convert it into this book. I found that apart from maybe 30-40 pages within it, the majority of the book seems like it could have been written by a stenographer, and where it was dictated, the conversation was taped, of course, and then pretty much dictated verbatim from the cassettes onto what is now the book that I've basically just shown you. And there was, of course, like a slight intro to it, which was good. And of course, Ted Bundy's words were captivating. I hung on purely for that reason, because I wanted to know what Ted Bundy said to get somewhat of an insight into his mind. But in terms of actual probing questions, things like that, it seemed to be a bit more geared towards obtaining a confession from him rather than actually getting like information out of him and letting him tell his story. Anybody that's actually seen the Bundy videos, YouTube documentaries, things like that, knows that Ted Bundy likes to talk. He does get a case of the verbal diarrhea. He loves the limelight, things like that. So basically giving Ted Bundy that free flow to actually just speak, I'm pretty sure he would have said whatever he wanted to say without too much prompting. Essentially in this book, what they did is they agreed for Bundy to speak in the third person. Understandably so, of course, because Ted Bundy was in the process of his appeals. Speaking as a killer in the first person would have solidified that he actually did commit the murders, and of course the grounds for appeals would have been shot. But speaking in the third person allowed him to speak to a degree, somewhat, about the killings, the mindset of the killings, things like that, but without directly implicating himself as such. So the constant stepping in to try and forcefully go for a confession seemed to kind of halt that process for me to quite a degree, rather than just having the free-flowing speech of Bundy go ahead. So I did find that to be somewhat disappointing. Positive aspects from the book, there was quite a few positive aspects. The biggest one for me was the foreword, actually. It was done by Robert Keppel, who was the chief investigator in Washington State at the time, when one of the times when Bundy was apprehended. This guy is just essentially was just one of the arresting police officers, but actually surprisingly found that his foreword to be extremely well written, informative, and actually left you wanting that a little bit more, which was a very welcome surprise. So much so that I've actually been looking at Bob Keppel's books to see if there's any more written just by him. I mean, and as it turns out, there, of course, he did collaborate with Ted Bundy on the creating a profile for the Green River Killer. Now, obviously, this person, it wasn't discovered until much later after Bundy had died, but I'm very curious to actually see the writing of the book, his work with Bundy, because, as I said, Keppel's writing style is actually extremely good, and very free-flowing, and it does make you want to seek out more. So I am going to be looking at that book, going to be reading it, and quite possibly giving a review on the show at some point as well. I have to say, Stephen McCord, I'm not really sure how to spell it, and Hugh Ainsworth, I would be less inclined to be seeking out their books, just given the nature of the opportunity that they were given with this Ted Bundy books, and with a, like I said, a direct verbatim stenographer style quoting of just their conversations rather than a more storytelling type of point of view. So that does make me somewhat less inclined to read it. But of course, anything with Ted Bundy's name to it, as a somewhat of a true crime like fan, a scholar, a person of interest, I'm going to be checking out everything I possibly can. With the book itself, I mean, obviously it's just a basic, like I said, it's a direct quote, but I mean, there was a few quite startling revelations within this book, whether it be true or not. But Ted Bundy did tend to speak about the crimes or the mindset of the person who would have committed these crimes as somebody that wasn't so much a killer as such. Of course, he did do the killings, but the majority of these cases seem to be around the mindset of actually a sexual assault, and the necessity for the killings wasn't so much as a want for killing. It was more about silencing any potential witnesses that could have obviously incriminated him in terms of the assaults themselves. So it almost seemed necessary to actually kill the people, to silence them, or kill the girls to silence them, so that they basically couldn't essentially point the finger, much like Carol Duranch did in the kidnapping case, which was in Utah. So from that point of view, it was interesting. I mean, it doesn't make it any better. It just seems to paint Bundy as more of a rapist style, as opposed to a killer. But of course, the killings seemed to come hand in hand out of the fear of wanting to be caught. So things like that I did find quite interesting. Another thing I find I'm not 100% sure if at this point in time Bundy had seemed to, as he did with his final interviews just days before his execution, and where he had found God and things like that. But what I did notice was in this book was the sense of a very sort of spiritual mindset of Bundy, where he was at peace with himself, not necessarily at peace with what he's done. I mean, that was quite clear in the final interviews that I don't remember the name of the documentary, but where Bundy spoke about basically being confronted with pornography at a young age, and that kind of seemed to spur him on, and as a downward spiral, as a form of a catalyst, things like that. But obviously, like in that final interviews, there's some crimes he just couldn't talk about. You could see it kind of give him a bit of a lump in his throat, and he didn't want to talk about it. But I mean, his whole persona in this, I mean, he didn't seem to fear death. I mean, although he did try to get a stay of execution, he didn't seem to fear death at this particular point in time. He was comfortable with who he was, what he'd done. I mean, the here and now. I mean, he didn't dwell on the past as much. He's just literally focused on who he was on that particular day, and try to go on for the next day, which, I mean, a lot of prisoners do tend to find God when they are faced with things like that. But you do get the sense from this book that Bundy was somewhat genuine in his approach. Whether that would have meant that should he have been let out, of course he was never going to, but should he have been let out, would he have killed again? Who's to say? I'm thinking probably yes, he would have, because, I mean, for me, it seems that Bundy wasn't the sort of person that would have taken on psychological counselling too well, because having a degree in psychology himself, he wouldn't have been that open to other people's belief systems, points of view, systems of therapy. I think he would have tried to have gained that kind of one-upmanship on them, as he seems to do with like the media, the authorities, things like that. So would it have worked? Probably not. Would he have killed again? Probably would have. But I mean, to hear him speak so candidly about his presence of mind and a state of mind at that particular time was a bit of an eye-opener, something that you don't really see in a lot of documentaries or in a lot of books. But of course, this book being one of the very few, if only, that actually gets first-hand experience with Bundy, there wasn't really that opportunity in other books for Bundy to actually get those sort of points across. So it does, I mean, as much as I didn't like the way it was written and it was a stenography style book, it was quite insightful. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I mean, I, I look forward to reading it. I wouldn't say it was a page turner. I mean, it was a page turner in the fact of I want to know what Bundy was saying. It wasn't a page turner so much when you've seen the questions that the two authors actually posed towards me. In fact, I find myself getting somewhat frustrated by it, but I mean, at the end of the day, you kind of bypass that because the primary goal was, of course, to get the words of Bundy. I mean, everybody knows, I mean, he committed, 30 to 36 killings. I mean, the California, beg your pardon, Florida, there was like 3 killings. There was the Colorado killings as well as the Washington and Utah killings. But, I mean, of course, there were separate trials for each of those. But, I mean, at the end of the day, there was never ever going to be a full confession in this book. So I find if they just let Bundy speak a bit more and get that sort of verbal diarrhea that he seems to like, I think that a lot more could have been gained from that. So, but I mean, all in all, it was a good book. Like I said, would I actively seek out these two authors? Probably not. Will I seek out Bob Keppel? 100% definitely. Fantastic writing style. I mean, even if the guy had to write fiction, I'd probably look into buying one of his books because it is very well written and very descriptive. Will I search more on Bundy books and topics? Absolutely. Well, of course, like I said, I'm a true crime serial killer scholar as well as having an interest in it. So, of course, I'm going to gain as much information as I can. So, I mean, if I have to give it an out of 10, in terms of Bundy Words, I'd say a good 8 out of 10. In terms of an author, style of writing, novel, storytelling, I'm probably going to give it maybe a 3 out of 10. So, all in all, probably about 6, maybe. Yeah, I mean, I did enjoy it, but it could have been better. Right, on to the next part of our show. I don't know if you remember, if anybody has actually read the blog, you'll see that there's going to be a competition time. And what that basically is, that I would like you, anybody who's watching it, anybody who's subscribed, if you can share this channel, the show, onto your Instagram, onto your YouTube, your Twitter, things like that. After you've done so, drop a wee comment in the YouTube thing saying shared or something like that. And what you then will do is your name will go into a draw. And from that draw, in probably a week, 2 weeks time, you're going to get one of these. The lucky winner will get a signed copy of my latest fiction book. Now, like I said before, this fiction book is unedited. I've got very, very few of them. So an extremely limited run. So even when it does come out with a publisher, this is going to be like something of a bit of a prized possession, like a hen's teeth, so to speak. Extremely rare. So what I'll do, the winner will get whatever personalized message that they like. I'll sign it, whatever message they want to. But what you need to do is you need to go on and share it. Like I said, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, whatever social media you have, drop a wee comment into it and your name goes into a draw. Always looking to expand not just the true crime things, but I'd like people to see what goes on in my imagination. So enter the competition, get it shared, and then you could be the lucky winner of it. As always, I'm always on the lookout for new things to put into the show. So there'll be an announcement coming up on my blog, which is, you'll see down here, it's www.bkjacksonauthor.com. So go on there, subscribe to the channel, and I shall see you all next Sunday with a new topic. So stay safe and goodbye.